Are you ready to elevate your coaching to the next level? We thought that might be the case. It's challenging to keep our coaching skills fresh and relevant, but part 2 of our 4-part series on transformational coaching builds on providing you with the tools to enable you to do just that. Welcome to Friday Fuel. So prior to sharing this week's tips, we're just going to recap on the Infinitus 5-step transformational coaching model that we're going to be talking to. So the 5 steps are discover, plan, coach, check in, and reflect. In our previous session, we touched on discover and took you through some tips around that. And the top tips looked at observations, learning styles, and learning speeds. One of the other key elements to a successful coaching program or session is actually in the planning, which is part 2 of the 5-step program. So knowing what development the person requires, why they need that development, the outcomes the coaching or the sessions are aiming to achieve, and then consideration about how the coaching sessions or program is going to be created and facilitated is key to a successful program.
And when we are actually going through and we're planning in our heads a coaching session, you could actually do this on speed. You can actually do it rapidly when you are looking at a situation, you've identified a coaching need, and you can speed up this process that Sarah and I are about to take you through. Alternatively, for greatest impact, one thing that you really need to do in your plan is to be very clear either way on what are your learning objectives, what are the learning outcomes, and when the easiest way to think about learning outcomes is around what could they be doing at the end to actually embed that new behavior that you're trying to coach them. So all a learning outcome is what is that outcome that you want them to embed on an ongoing basis, and then together you work your way through that. So with the techniques that I always say with learning outcomes is don't use the word understand, because people actually need to do something for you to understand that that outcome has been achieved. So use words like adapt, it might be list or explain or demonstrate. They're words that will actually enable that action enable you to be able to test. So what we want you to do here is when you're going through, you're really clear on the learning outcomes and objectives. Then the 2 things we really want you to look at is framing and chunking. Easiest way of thinking about these is take your coaching session. Think about all the information that you've collected in that discover phase about their personality and their learning style and learning speed, etc. And just like a pizza, I always think it's quite interesting. You can use it from a pizza side of things. With a pizza, you don't eat usually the whole thing. You slice it up into segments. This is what Sarah and I recommend that you do here, is that you take your coaching message and you slice it into bite-sized pieces that your audience, the person that you're going to be coaching, can handle. Because what we want to do is we want each coaching step or coaching conversation to have a stretch, but we don't want the stretch to be so big that they get overwhelmed and you don't get any traction. So you want people to get that sense of winning with every stretch goal that you set for them within a coaching session or coaching conversation. The next thing that is really important to do is to frame each of those chunks up. Now, the easiest way to think about framing is think about why you put something in a frame at home. If you've got a photo in a frame at home, why do you put that? Usually it's to make sure that it gives it prominence, it gives it importance. Same thing in a coaching session. And the easiest way to think about framing in a coaching session is to think, how do I hook in the attention? If I want to coach this, then it's important. But knowing, using that information you used in that discover phase, you say, right, what example could I use? What hobby could I use? What case study or project have they been involved in the past that I can pull from? So it's very simple. A frame could be a question, it could be a statistic, it could be a case study, it could be a short video, it could be showing an end result, just something very short that grabs their attention and elevates the importance of what you're about to talk about. The last thing that I would like to share before I hand back to Sarah is around resources. We talked about learning styles and how people like to learn in the last one. When you've got your frames and your chunks together, you understand the person you're coaching better, then it's important to match the appropriate resources to that. So Sarah, you've got some areas in regard to a little bit of a different angle for that. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And actually, just to layer on what you're talking about, Kirsten's talked about the chunks and the framing, so we're going to keep going with the pizza thing. And it's actually how we're going to use those resources and use that information to make sure that we're doing some practical activities with people. And as Kirsten likes to talk to, it's about putting a lens over the top of what we're doing so that those sessions and interactions that we're having with people aren't all about us just talking, but there's those activities for people to get involved with in that process as well. So it's really important that we make sure our sessions aren't all about us just communicating information down, but there are lots of different resources we can use throughout those sessions to help people understand. We talked about the different learning styles last time, and this is where it's really important to make sure people have the different styles of information coming at them and that they're interacting with it differently, so that you're covering all those learning bases for people and they're able to interact and get involved in those practical activities to really cement that learning opportunity that's being presented in that session. And the other thing we need to remind ourselves about is actually, how do we make this practical, and then how are we going to check for understanding, which is a little bit different to asking the person, do you understand? It's around how we're going to make sure that the information's really being embedded in the most meaningful way through all of those frames, structures and resources that we've put in place for that particular session.
I always love that, isn't it, Sarah? Because so often people, you know, they're so quick, they just want to get that conversation over. And so they quickly tell somebody something and then they just say, did you get that? And all the person does is nod and go, yep, got that. And all they're thinking is, we just go away so I can go back to doing exactly what I want to do. So your challenge that Sarah and I would like you to do this week is to have a look at what planning do you actually do, so that when you have a coaching situation or a coaching conversation, either at home, on the sports field, in your hobby, or at work, it's really important to put these skills to practice. So catch yourself thinking, what are the outcomes that I'd like to achieve? How do I break this message down based on the knowledge of the person or the people that I'm about to be coaching, to make sure that they will get it? So they get a stretch, but they don't get that sense of overwhelm. They get the stretch to get that sense of winning. And then how do you frame it? How do you make sure you've got that practical interaction, which is absolutely key along with interaction. Remember, coaching is not telling. Coaching is required to make sure you've got space to enable them to think so that they can engage. Enjoy your week, and we look forward to taking you through some tips around the coaching conversation next week.